Hi everybody, this is Laney. Hope you all are doing well. In this video, I will highlight Hiring Day, also known as Heartbreak Day. Americans are likely to think of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day as a time to celebrate the fresh start that the new year represents. But there is also a troubling side to the holiday's history. In the years before the Civil War, the first day of New Year was often a heartbreaking one for enslaved people in the United States of America. In the African American community, New Year's Day used to be widely known as Hiring Day or Heartbreak Day. African Americans spent New Year's Eve waiting to see if they would be sold, wondering if their owners were going to rent them out to someone else, thus potentially splitting up their families. The renting out of slave labor was a relatively common practice in the antebellum South and a profitable practice for white slave owners and hires. Hiring Day was a part of the larger economic cycle in which most debts were collected and settled on New Year's Day. Some enslaved people were put up for auction that day or held under contract that started in January. These transactions also took place all year long, and contracts could last for a different amount of time. These deals were conducted privately among families, friends, and business contracts, and slaves were handed over in town squares, on courthouse steps, and sometimes simply on the side of the road. Accounts of the cruelty of Heartbreak Day come from records left by those who secured their freedom, who describe spending the day before January 1st, hoping and praying that their hires would be humane and that their families would stay together. Of all the days in the year, the slaves dreaded New Year's Day, the worst of any. On New Year's Day, they went to the auctioneer's block to be hired to the highest bidder of the year. From Christmas to New Year's Eve, many families would wait anxiously to find out whether they would be rented out and to whom. On New Year's Day, at the appointed hour, the grounds would be filled with men, women, and children waiting like criminals to hear if their doom was pronounced. On one of these fateful days, a mother led 7 children to the auction block. She knew that some of them would be taken from her, but they took all. The slave trader who took the children wouldn't tell her where he was taking them because it depended on where he could get the highest price. It is said that they would never forget the mother crying out, "Gone, all gone. Why don't God kill me?" Enslaved people who attempted to resist going to their new masters were whipped and thrown in jail until they relented and promised not to run away during the new arrangement. Older slaves were also particularly vulnerable. A 70-year-old frail woman was also hired out. But the holiday of New Year's Day and American slavery is not all horror. The holiday was also associated with freedom. The federal ban on the transatlantic slave trade went into effect on New Year's Day in 1807, and African American communities did celebrate, but the festivities were short-lived. The slave trade commemoration took place between 1808 and 1831, but they died out because the domestic slave trade was so vigorous, and the risk of violence was also too great. For example, on New Year's Eve in 1827 in New York City, a white mob attacked African American congregants and vandalized their church. The holiday became more associated with freedom than slavery when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing slaves in Confederate states on New Year's Day in 1863. Slaves went to church to pray and sing on December 31st, 1862, and that's why there are still New Year's Eve prayer services at African American churches nationwide, known as Watch Night Service. Congregants continue to pray for widespread racial equality more than 150 years later. So there you have it, a little bit of history on Hiring Day or Freedom Day, the way that African Americans celebrated back in the 1800s. Be well, stay safe, and stay in peace, not pieces. Hit that bell so you will know every time I upload a video. Word of the year, peace. Peace. Deuces. See you soon.